Welcome to the first episode of the Modern Adolescent podcast. What? Oh my goodness. Sorry. Oh my god. I have no idea how to run a podcast. I'm really trying to figure it out, as I am doing this. I filmed a trial episode of this. Didn't really work out that well. Actually, no, it did work out well. It actually sounded pretty good. But, I don't know, I have 8 tabs open on my computer right now, and I'm really trying to figure this out. I am so incredibly excited to be here. I'm so excited that, finally this is going. This has been something that's kind of been in my mind for almost a year now, and I'm happy that I'm finally have the means to start this and hopefully do it well. So, yeah, I'm really, really just excited to be here and get this off the ground. So you're probably listening to this and you either know me from school, which in that case, hey, or you don't know me at all. So a little bit of background about who I am. My name is Caitlin. Currently I'm a junior at a high school in central Massachusetts, Worcester County area, if you know your geography very well. And I'm starting a mental health podcast, as you can see or hear. So my intent with this podcast is kind of for it to be an open discussion about mental health in teenagers and in high school. I'm hoping to have a lot of interview-based episodes with students, with professionals, with parents, administration, what have you, whatever pertains to that specific topic that I am talking about. All kind of around mental health and mental health in teenagers. Something that I find a lot of the time when we're talking about mental health, especially mental health in teenagers and education with that is found, it kind of does get glossed over, if that makes any sense. It's very broad, it's very broad, kind of really the basics that might need to be known, but there's not really too much of an open discussion around the country currently when it comes to mental health. There definitely is a stigma there definitely is progress that has been made with breaking that stigma, but within just talking about it and talking about an individual high school experience, I think there is a long way to go, and this podcast is really meant to be something where I can create hopefully an open discussion about, a multitude of issues that pertain to high school students and kind of what the modern high school experience is today, what a modern adolescent experience is in 2021. So today's episode is really just an introduction episode. It isn't anything too groundbreaking, if that makes any sense. So this episode today is really just an introduction episode. We're not going to dive too deep into specific topics on mental health today. It's really meant kind of just to be an introduction, kind of so you know kind of what you're getting yourself into, and then in future dates, I'm hoping to have more longer form episodes. 30 to 45 minutes is my goal, but for today, this podcast episode is probably going to be only 15 minutes long. So in this episode, I kind of did want to go into kind of my motivations to creating this podcast, and kind of just a really broad introduction of just the type of topics, the type of issues that we're going to be diving deeper into in specific episodes. So this idea came about while I was in quarantine. And, in quarantine, a lot of people had time to think for themselves. It was a very unique experience. I think that isn't a new idea to be presented. It was a weird time for everyone. So the idea for this podcast really came about during quarantine. During quarantine, we were all alone, had a lot of time to ourselves. That isn't anything groundbreaking or new for me to say. But I was getting to thinking kind of about, my own personal experiences throughout high school at that point. At that point I was halfway through my sophomore year. And just kind of how I went through that, how that was handled for me. And I kind of realized a lot of the things that I really had been taught throughout my high school experience, or have experienced throughout my high school experience, really weren't tailored to what kind of the modern collective experience that high schoolers have these days. They were either a little bit dated or a little bit too broad, something like that, and they really weren't tailored to what an actual high schooler kind of goes through and like the everyday thoughts that plagues a high schooler. And I got to thinking, I was like, there really isn't, for me at least, a forum for high schoolers to speak to other high schoolers in this way about their own experience, and to kind of just like normalize chatting about mental health, because, you know, you talk to your friend every day. You might be talking to your friend about like mental health or like specific situations, and it's a really open discussion that occurs, and, you know, that's really helpful, and it's a collective kind of understanding, if that makes any sense. So really my goal for this podcast is to kind of create that open dialogue between people about kind of what the modern high school experience is, and really create a by teenagers for teenagers resource and just discussion that, you know, can hopefully create a better understanding of kind of how the modern teenage experience is, and really kind of what it's like. So something I think is really lacking in the modern day mental health resources is that, you know, the world is changing faster than it's ever changed before, and the teenager experience, and from that, the teenager experience is changing faster than it has before. High school right now is fundamentally different than it was, you know, 10 years ago. It really used to be like a teenager's life was really confined within the walls of the school or the walls of their activity or something like that. But now you have things like social media and constant connection that really opens a person up more than ever before. Really, kids today are more exposed than ever. There's just so much constant connection. There really isn't a wall anymore, kind of between kids and the outside world, and that has created kind of just this like giant pressure on high schoolers today. And there's so many very unique experiences throughout high school that, you know, I think need to be addressed, need to be talked about, stuff like that. That is very, very unique to the kind of climate that we have in 2021. So again, my goal with this is, you know, since I'm a person who is currently going through that right now, is to, you know, highlight some of those situations that should be talked about more, or some of those very specific things that people go through high school that, you know, maybe need to be talked about more, or need, you know, that just need a better understanding, things like that. And I'm hoping that with different podcast topics, I'm able to do that. And I have so many different ideas for podcast topics, you know, from like just talking about individual years, like freshman year and sophomore year, and kind of just like what aspects of those I wish that I had been warned about, or that, you know, I went through pertaining to mental health. Also to just things like pressures to perform, you know, sports anxiety, like grades, the SAT, stuff like that, modern stuff like that, that really is prevalent for kids these days, and, you know, things of that nature that I think really should get talked about. So as for the way that I am releasing this podcast right now, I'm uploading this first onto YouTube just because that's the easiest way for me to get this out. Hopefully I'll get this out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as soon as possible, but those do have an approval process to them. So I'm going to try as hard as I can, you know, get those out as fast as possible. But as for right now, the video version is instantly going to be going up to YouTube, so you can see my gorgeous face in my brother's room talking about stuff like this, and then hopefully I can get the audio versions onto Spotify and Apple Music. I'm also planning on launching a website for this that holds, you know, more mental health resources, hopefully some articles, things like that, that will also house the podcast as well, just for, again, easier listening. So, you know, when starting this podcast, I was really interested kind of in like the collective feeling of, you know, high school. You know, you talk to kids in high school, and there's kind of these things that are unanimously agreed upon. And so I kind of wanted to collect data kind of just about like the modern mental health experience, really like broad things, you know, and just get data on that. So I pushed out a survey to the people that followed me on Instagram, and I got 51 responses on it. So thank you so much if you responded to my survey. Like, very, very grateful for your responses. I pushed these out to all of my Instagram followers, all high school age followers. So most of them that did respond did go to my high school. Some of them did go to other high schools around the central Massachusetts area. But, you know, this isn't, you know, just for, my current high school environment, this survey really was to promote, kind of like to see what the collective high school nature is. So something that I found, I asked participants in my survey if they felt like their high school provides adequate mental health resources to their needs. And the results I got, honestly, were a little bit surprising. So the options were just 100% yes. Their resources are pretty good but could be better. They provide some resource but definitely need to add more, or like straight up they do not provide adequate resources. And I will say right now, 51% of the people responded that they're pretty good but could be better, and 45% responded that there's some resources but they need to add more. So the majority of people responded in those two columns that were in the middle. So that tells me that there are, mental health resources in high schools that are being used and are effective, but there really isn't, there really hasn't been, this unanimous solution that really helps teenagers every single day. But the 51% being in that, pretty good but could be better range is telling me, that there is, progress being made in high school, even if it isn't, perfect or anything like that. That tells me that there is progress and hopefully an upward trend. And, kind of going with that, the next question I asked is your high school supportive when it comes to mental health? And honestly, the results I got for this made me feel like a lot better about society, honestly, because 62.7% says, I feel that the culture is mildly supportive when it comes to mental health, and 25.5% said, yes, the culture is supportive. So only 11.8% said that it's not supportive at all when it comes to mental health. So that's telling me, at least from a culture standpoint, so, the students, the faculty, just the all-around feeling that a high school has towards mental health, that's telling me, that is in an upward direction, which was something I was a little surprised about. I was expecting to see lower scores, but that higher percentage that's, agreeing that it's at least mildly supportive, is giving me a little bit of hope that, we're in an upward trajectory. Now, this was a question that I asked that I really felt like I wanted to touch upon. It was, do you feel as though your high school has adjusted its mental health resources due to the pandemic adequately? And 2/3 of the people who responded to my survey, so 66% exactly, said no. And, that large response, 2/3 of the people that taking my survey saying, like, no, my high school hasn't adjusted, that kind of does tell me a lot about, the flexibility that needs to be made with mental health resources. And, at the time that we're in, when during the pandemic where a lot of mental health resources, a lot of teenagers, there was an upward spike in, teenagers struggling with mental health, not having that adjusted, not feeling as though your resources were adjusted, I think that definitely is a problem. And I think that also goes to show, kind of like the long nature it takes to, adjust mental health resources. Like I was saying, teenagers are in a completely different age than before. And, mental health resources are still way back here, kind of trying to catch up. And that's kind of, that response, the 2/3 response, is kind of showing me like the lag that there is within adjusting mental health resources for particular situations. So then I asked a couple of free response questions to the survey, and all of my responses on the survey were anonymous, and I just kind of wanted to share kind of like what the majority of the responses said. So I said, is there anything specific about your high school experience that you wish you had been briefed about before experiencing, very specific things, that you went through that maybe you kind of wish you were warned about, stuff like that. And a lot of people said the importance of grades, and I think that is super true. I feel as though when I came to high school, I was kind of thrust into this environment that was just grade heavy. It was just this like battlefield for grades. It was insane. I was not prepared for what I was put into, and a lot of people agreed with me with that. It was just a very, very competitive environment, that, I was warned about, the competitive nature of high school, but I really wasn't brought to speed about what it actually was like. And I think definitely a lot of people had a hard time adjusting to that competitiveness. Yeah, a lot of people were talking about fending for themselves, stuff like that, the independence of it. And then I asked, what do you think schools could improve on? And a lot of people said the same thing. Mental health, it feels like it is stressed a lot in high school these days, as it should, but it is still this kind of like surface level thing that's stressed. They're stressing like you should have good mental health, but then they really don't do anything to, adjust to your specific needs or talk about specific things that should be talked about. And I think that's kind of this like weird point that we're lying in today, where there is, a discussion being formed about mental health, but it is just such a broad discussion that's being formed and that it really isn't going anywhere. And again, that's something I'm trying to do with this podcast, create a resource for teenagers to talk about teenager problems, kind of just create this atmosphere that, allows for that discussion to be made and hopefully progress forward when it comes to mental health. So I'm so excited for where this podcast can go. I already have so many ideas of, different topics, different interviews, stuff like that, to, really get the ball rolling on this mental health discussion. And again, create this safe atmosphere to talk about different subjects of mental health and to talk about, a high school experience, and whether it be really broad things about high school or super specific things that may only affect certain people. I really do want to have those open discussions, to try to improve, the mental health culture around teenagers right now. So thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. Look forward to more podcasts in the future. I want to say like and subscribe, but I know that this is going to be on so many different podcast outlets. So subscribe to whatever podcast outlet that you're currently listening to this on. Thank you so much, and have a great day.